Hey there, folks. It's Ben here from the Ben and Tony podcast, and we're really excited to welcome you back here again today. So, we're joined by Will McQuain today. Quick excerpt before we get started with him. What was most interesting to me about Will is the industry that he's chosen. He's definitely chosen to focus on kind of human vices in some way, shape, or form throughout his startup pursuits. He's gone from cigars to nootropics and beyond. This means that he's become an expert in the D2C space, and he shares with us some interesting approaches to consumer marketing, as well as to building some prosperous career networks early on. I personally really enjoyed this session with Will, and I hope that you enjoy some of the more quirky moments to it too. How do you fancy trading in your coffee in the morning for legal cognitive enhancing substances? That's the question you'll be able to answer, and I hope you enjoy this. Over to you, Anthony.
Will has had quite the ride on the Silicon Valley roller coaster. I loved hearing his story coming from North Carolina to San Francisco to pursue the tech startup dream, experiencing crazy ups and downs and then going through an acquisition. Then he tackled a unique problem space, the cigar industry, an area I knew absolutely nothing about until I met Will. Now things seem to have come full circle as he's working on this nootropic productivity drink company, Magic Mind, with his first boss, who he has known for years. Will has experienced tons of serendipity throughout his career, and it reminds me to trust the process.
Great. Well, we're joined here by Okay, we're gonna go for that again. We're joined
Mill,
here
our man
by
Mill.
Will McQuain. Will McQuain, D2C expert, co-creator of Magic Mind, and you've got a really interesting focus throughout your career on vice industries. So you've done some really interesting stuff. We're gonna dig into all of those. We're gonna riff. We're gonna chat, and we're gonna see what comes out of it. So, welcome, Will.
Welcome.
We've
Hi, glad to be here. Thank you.
We're glad to have you. First transitional phase that we spoke through, what does that look like for you in your career or your personal journey?
Sure. So after college, I spent some time in digital marketing. So I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'd always had an affinity for tech and startups, but went to school in North Carolina. Ended up in Charlotte, not a budding tech scene there, but worked at a very big kind of Google-esque company down there, which was a great place to learn, start my career. Left there after a year to join what I thought was that same company, just smaller, just to be on the ground of something. I was really enamored with that quote of if you can find a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just get on. So I sort of thought I was getting that with this first place in Charlotte. And about 3 months in, figured out that it absolutely was not a rocket ship. Maybe it would have been for other people who worked there, but I just felt pigeonholed into the role and was young, didn't feel like I had the sort of resume trajectory that I was hoping to build. Like in high school, you work really hard to get into a good school and get a really good job and then get, sort of work your way up. And I just felt like I had made some sort of weird downward slope choice, which was scary at age 23. And so while there, I was able to kind of complete my job without using the full 8 hours of the day. And so I started moonlighting on a online coding boot camp. And so I was like, I don't know where I want to go next, but I feel like this skill set will open some doors for me. And so started to do that. I would sort of stay late at the office, wave oh, bye, I'm going to stay here and work late. But, if they had looked at my screen, I hadn't been doing actual work for probably an hour at the end of the day. So did that for, the program was 3 months long. And in the middle of the second month, I suddenly saw write up in Forbes did a 30 under 30 and covered one of the people on that list was the guy who I had interned for in college. I did a college internship like many of us did. I wanted to work for a small company. And so one of the alumni, him and another guy, started a company that was a startup aimed at trying to offer like microfinance services in at the time South Africa, and so I got to go and intern in South Africa for a summer, which was actually the summer that the World Cup was there. So it was a pretty spectacular.
Wow, very fun, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, it was awesome. We went to 3 matches because we were able to get tickets as locals because they had been living there for a while, and so the tickets were not nearly as expensive as they would otherwise be. But I saw 3 games. Every single game was a draw, and one of the games was 0-0, which was a huge, just hilarious to go to a World Cup match and then see a 0-0 game. Anyways,
that's really, really disappointing.
I know, but the other games were amazing. It was fun to be there. But with the major downside, the main thing that I wanted out of that was a job, and the startup was kind of like crumbling even by the time I arrived, let alone like was going to offer me some sort of full-time role. So years later, I see James on the, in Forbes with his startup, which had gone through YC, didn't know what that was at the time, was backed by Andreessen, didn't know what that was at the time. And so I shot him a note on LinkedIn and I was like, James, it's been a long time. This looks awesome. I noticed you guys are hiring. Here's 3 different jobs that you guys are hiring for that I think I could do. Let's talk. And so one of his like right-hand guys called me the next day and he was like, Will, I think I met you at James's wedding. And I was like, no, you didn't, but I'm glad we're talking. I was just excited to kind of get my foot in the door.
Were those jobs all listed, or did you kind of come up with the things that you wanted to do for them?
Oh, they were listed. I don't think I would have been savvy enough at the time to have invented a job or to have known what they needed. And the jobs were, at the time I was doing like kind of analyst work specifically in digital marketing. And so a lot of spreadsheets, and the jobs were like, it was like customer support, kind of helping to build that department. And then like an account manager for their B2B side. And then I'm spacing now on what the other one was, maybe some sort of sales thing, which I had never done. But the interviews like went fairly well, and it was clear that their biggest need was customer support, which at the time in my mind was like kind of a further step down in terms of role compared to what I was doing, but was able to kind of message it to them and also to myself to be like, hey, I'm coming from this very like data heavy analytical side of marketing, and I think I could come and try to provide that to the customer support department with the goal of like, this is a high growth tech startup. Let me help you build this out in a smart way such that when you have 10 times as many users, you don't have 10 times as many support tickets. And so there was a bit more of there was a way to get excited about the job beyond just sort of like replying to tickets day in and day out. But
is this in South Africa, or had they moved at that point to...
Oh, sorry. This was fast. This was jumping back
company.
into when I was living in Charlotte. This was James's new company. So it was called Crowd Tilt. It was a crowdfunding platform meant to be. I often described it at the time to people like if Venmo and Kickstarter had a baby. And so I guess from the moment of emailing James, hey, here's 3 jobs that I think that I could do. I think about 2.5 weeks later, I was on a plane moving out there full time. I'd flown out there with my new wife at the time. We got married in November, and I think that this all happened 5 months later. So we broke our lease. I moved to San Francisco 2 months before she got there, and then we just sort of plopped down in San Francisco, and so that was definitely a massive transition for me and for my wife, who at the time was working in PR. Got a PR job that she hated. I felt like I had sort of left. I was leaving a bad situation for a good one, and I felt like she had left a good situation for a bad one, and so that was a real bummer for her and me for a month. And she left the first job that she took, and then got a job at a company called Airbnb about 6 years ago, and she's been at Airbnb for 6 years. So it turned out to be a fantastic transition.
I don't think I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're going to be big. You're going to hear about them.
Was that a difficult decision for you? I mean, it seems like pretty straightforward the way you describe it. Like, apply, like reach out to your friend. Okay, it's working out. It's going to SF. Did you have any like doubts, or was it just very clear to you that this is what I should be doing?
I think it was clear to me. I remember I was reminiscing about this with my wife recently. I remember in November on our honeymoon, specifically feeling like just this burden around what I described as like, I felt like I kept going up and that this recent decision had been a downward trend, and that was really scary. And so I had spent enough time in the mindset of being like, this isn't it. The place that I'm currently in is not where I want to be. And so I think that made me open to like big, scary potentially things. So my mindset at the time wasn't like, oh no, is this like thing? I was seeing that as like, oh my gosh, this would be the most amazing escape hatch from something that I've known isn't right for a long time. So that's the headspace that I was in at that time. And she was like extremely supportive. I think that, that was the bigger thing, is that it was not just a transition for me, it was a transition for us. We had just gotten married. It was a big time of change in our life. So there was an element of adventure to it as well. It was like, hey, let's get out of here. Like, living in Charlotte, North Carolina, everybody we know is married with kids. And, we went to a Christmas party where people are talking about renovating their bathrooms. And we're like,
and you're 23, right? That's way too young to be thinking that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Was not where I was in at the time.
Had you been to SF before, and your wife, like, were you familiar with the place? Was it completely new? Like, you'd never been to that city before?
I had been once, but like, my experience with San Francisco was like going to, Pier 39, Fisherman's Wharf area. My uncle lives in the East Bay. So we visited them once in high school. So I went out for the interview, which went really well. And so we had like one big day in the city to sort of be like, what would it be like if we lived here? And obviously fell in love with the city.
Amazing.
That's awesome, man. What was the kind of culture, like the tech scene that you were joining? Did you know that it was, particularly with your wife looking to join Airbnb, did you know that you were coming into kind of a flourishing, blossoming place, or was it a bit of a risk even in terms of geography at the time?
It was, I think that we knew to some extent, coming from Charlotte, we knew that San Francisco was like a big city and would have opportunity. I definitely had no idea about like really the tech scene that existed. So this was 2014 when I came there, which at the time, like the environment at the time, as an anecdote, like we were talking to so many people about the process of finding an apartment, and there were somebody at the company, I was like, hey, do you guys have advice? I'm about to move there to find a place to live. I was living with my aunt and uncle in the East Bay, taking the BART in every morning for about 2 months. And it was such a hot market that we ended up working with a broker who had this flat fee. He was like, I will help you like find a place and get you in before it gets there, because something would go up on Craigslist, and then that same day 20 people would show up with 2 months worth of rent in cash in hand, and things would just get snatched up. So we paid somebody 1 month's rent, which at the time was like $3,400, to find a place for us. He showed us one place. I went to one place, was like, wow, we could get this place? Yeah, let's do it. And I paid him $30. So that's how crazy it was at the time, just being there. But I loved, from day one, it felt so energizing to, like, we sold our cars. We could walk to work. And on the walk to work, I would overhear people like, doing one-on-ones or on the phone talking about like, which at the time was like super exciting to me. I think, I imagine people who've been there a while find it nauseating now, and a lot of the aspects of the scene certainly are, but it was like, it was a drug, it was crack to me at the
time. That's so good. So like you saw that he was on the Forbes 30 under 30. Was that kind of the main thing that made you think, like, hey, this is a leader, I'm going to follow him to this place, no matter what his vision is, I think he's up for it, and I want to be there with him?
That's a good question. To some degree, yeah. I mean, it was, and our relationship has continued today. So he and I have sort of like worked together, separated, and we're working together again now on our third time around. So I think I saw him as a connector, somebody who could open a door into this world, and I felt very much like an outsider or some imposter syndrome to be like, oh, I went to school in North Carolina, that I, had spent time in Charlotte, and you can look at a place like San Francisco and kind of regard it as this like, oh my gosh, everybody there is so much more capable and competent. And how would I break in? I don't have any relationships. And he was just somebody who I felt like it was just this glowing way to get in. That was really most of it. And I'd known about myself for a while that I wanted to work on something that was like small. I wanted to be a part of something small and help it grow.
Right. Yeah.
And I think they had just raised their Series A at the time. So it was just like a really great time to get in. I think I was employee 30, late 20s.
How did it go when you got there? Like, what was it like when you first got on the job?
Was he still the same guy? Was he a good guy?
Oh yeah, he's great. I didn't know how to play it. I showed up to the interview even, and it was like, he comes out with his co-founder, and I like kind of go in for the handshake, because in my mind, it's like you're 23, you're kind of dressed nice for an interview, and he like came in and gave me a hug, and I was just like, oh, okay, that's it very quickly you realize that like the formality doesn't exist for the most part in the tech scene in SF, or really SF in general, right? Let's say you go to nice restaurants and people are wearing like gym shorts and a hoodie. Yeah, he was amazing, and then showing up there was, it was great. I think for the time that we were in San Francisco, we moved there. We didn't really know anyone. I knew him, but only in the relationship of like, I was his intern for 2 months, so it's not like we were best friends. Mm-hmm. But coming there and just, over the 4 years that we were there, most of my closest friends were people I met through being at Tilt, and then a lot of our close friends were my wife's co-workers at Airbnb. There's just sort of this great like kind of post-college experience. It sort of emulates like campus or dorm life, because you're just day in and day out, and nights and weekends sometimes with these people trying to bring something to life.
How did things go with Tilt? Like, what was it like your time there? And were you there for a while, but ups and downs?
I would say Tilt was like the penultimate kind of, I feel like I got the perfect Silicon Valley experience of like, nice. We felt like we were the next, it was like, had a lot of hype, had a great board, great funding, all of the right ingredients, still some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. Just kind of one of those cases, which I think was kind of typical at the time, is, we were trying to, we were taking a mindset that really growth would solve every problem. And it just reached a point where I think between round Series C and D, it just became harder to raise based on the like revenue that we were bringing in. So there was a business model function. And so the first few years were just like up and up and up. And it was a cool social component to the app. The nature of the app was to make it easy for people to pool money together to do interesting things. And so as a way to prove out the app, we were doing things like, all over the city, we would like, everybody would chip in $10 or $20 to get a party bus. And we would like on Friday night, go drink around SF. And then ways to like really showcase that in a big way is Tilt would throw like a Halloween party where it would be such a big Halloween party and maybe $40 a ticket or something like that. And that was able to pay for like a floating kind of riverboat casino. And so out in the bay, we would have this riverboat Halloween party. There was one time where we tilted a private plane to fly a group of people to Vegas for one night and come back. So I mean, it's just like,
you move there, you're leaning back, you're like, this is the experience I was after.
Like, I am
a private jet to Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, it was very, I guess at the time, Silicon Valley wasn't totally out yet, but like what the social network, you're sort of like looking at some of these like early tech success stories. And I think we all felt super optimistic that we were building something really special. And then, we got up to maybe 130 employees, and there were a couple slow months or some like fundraising woes, and there's sort of the first round of cuts. We went from 130 employees down to something like 60, I want to say 60 or 70. And so that was immediately tough. Like, it was like, okay, this is not this, the first dip on the roller coaster. And then from there, it was kind of like a little bit of touch and go around like, what will the future look like? Is this going to work? And there's a lot of optimism, but also, I think I was young enough and new enough to the tech scene that I didn't really fully understand the environment that we were in, or understand what it's like to be in that position where you have runway and burn, and it's a math problem to determine how long you can stay alive. And leadership wants to be transparent, but also when you're in a position like that, you've got to kind of sell the vision and sort of fingers crossed that it works.
Yeah, so you've kind of ridden it up, but you're in a bit of a state of flux, even if you weren't kind of consciously aware of it at the time. What kind of happened next? What was the next step?
I mean, I would really say that like that's kind of a nice bridge into the next transition round. I when they did those round of cuts, it was clear to me that I was not on the chopping block, but I was very close to that chopping block. And so started at that moment, sort of starting to think ahead to be like, okay, well, if Tilt doesn't become the next Facebook and I don't make millions of dollars, what should I do? And my role at the time, I'd started in customer support, worked up to kind of like an account manager role on some of the technical, our technical B2B product. And then towards the end was the PM on that project, which was, it was a embeddable pre-order button or crowdfunding tool for brands who wanted to like run a crowdfunding campaign or sell pre-orders for a product that didn't exist yet and wanted to do that simply on their own site, not on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. So it was a way to be like, hey, we want to present the vibe that we are a company, not a group of guys in a garage who invented something. And I think in a lot of ways, we were, that was probably the dawn of the direct-to-consumer era, and a lot of tech-enabled hardware products started to use the pre-order button to sort of say like, hey, we're launching a credit card that you can load multiple credit cards on, like if you guys remember Plastic or Coin, I think was one of them. Wipe was another one. So we became like the platform du jour for a lot of those brands. And so I got to sit behind the scenes and watch these companies sort of put together the initial planning, have a prototype, a team, good branding, and then kind of put together some press and launch a product. And so we got good at helping companies think about how to launch and debut their product. And it really felt like sitting on the sidelines for a long time and sort of being like, I wonder if I feel like I could do this, because I'm sort of watching behind the scenes, and some teams would come in and have a ton of money and be really sharp and be super intimidated. And other ones I'd be like, if these guys can do it, there's a playbook here. I can figure this out. So I had always been kind of uniquely among the people that I know really into cigars. That was like a big hobby of mine in college. I didn't drink for the first few years of college, and so cigars were my way to like kick back with guys on my dorm. And I think as a guy, it's not normal to like sit around with men and like have deep get to know you conversations, but cigars force you to do exactly that, which was a great way to like, meet a lot of my closest friends in college. And it was a big hobby of mine. And so I wondered, I was like, maybe there's a way for me to pursue that and build a direct consumer brand around cigars. It's a very antiquated industry. There's a massive branding problem with the way that it looks. Cigars are intimidating for a lot of people. There's a lot of opportunity for education. So I started moonlighting on a version of that idea, thinking like, I'm going to keep working at Tilt until I get this to a certain point where I can see where that goes.
So you had this idea of a direct-to-consumer cigar brand. Like, was it geared towards like young men? Was there a competitive landscape around this? It's an idea that I think it makes a lot of sense, but I'm just thinking to myself, like, who else has done that before? Like, I think that sounds like a great idea.
At the time, not a lot of people. No. There were there were early kind of like the early round of retailers coming in and just sort of like digitizing an online cigar shop. I was trying to do something, I guess, close to Birchbox. My thesis was, it's really difficult to know when you walk into a cigar store if you don't know what you're looking for and you're not somebody who enjoys being a nerd about cigars, you have no idea what's good. So could we create a program where we would, like, you could sign up and we'll say, hey, all you need to know is that you want to smoke cigars and we will do the rest of it. So, and then the long-term thinking was, we'll collect all of this data around who likes to smoke what cigars and then become kind of an advertising platform for cigar companies, which is difficult to do. If you are a cigar company advertising, there are a lot of legal restrictions obviously around that. But even more problematic than the legal restrictions are just terms of service for companies, kind of the gatekeepers of the ads world, like Facebook and Google and Pinterest, Instagram. All of their ad policies are like, no gambling, no porn, no tobacco. And obviously that's great policy intended to curb like kids smoking cigarettes, but no one is out there making exceptions for $15 cigars, even though we all know that that's not a huge problem of 16-year-old kids walking into stores and smoking $15 cigars every day. So that was the thesis behind it. There were not really any groups doing it. And the cool part about having this idea at Tilt is that I decided to like build a first prototype while still working at Tilt. And then I put it out there on our platform and said, hey, if I can sell 100 of these, maybe there's something here. And so I had a friend that I started collaborating with on it, who was a lawyer. Obviously there's sort of a lot of regulatory issues on that kind of a product. And it was fun. I was able to do really all of these things that nobody would have ever hired me to do. Nobody would have ever, I'm somebody who at the time really enjoyed branding, but didn't have any experience doing that. So it was fun to just kind of wear every hat. And we built out this prototype and sold it to people as like a stocking stuffer. And because we put it on Tilt, I had this added horsepower that all of my coworkers were already on Tilt, and so they contributed as a way to support me and dog food the product. And then they shared it with all of their friends. The goal was to sell 100, and we sold 250.
Nice.
And so that Christmas, my wife and I and some friends of ours, we spent, I don't even know how many hours, ordering all this stuff, fulfilling it outside of my tiny 1-bedroom San Francisco apartment. We had Christmas movies going, and then kind of an assembly line of people like opening up a cigar box, taking them out, putting them into our packaging, adding a cutter and matches and yada yada, and like barely got the 250 out and shipped in time for Christmas. Kind of like had a crash course on learning Shopify, learning email marketing, learning any number of different things. And so came into the next year being like, all right, this was like, got some potential, got some momentum. I'm gonna, kind of do what I did in that like previous life in Charlotte of, I'm gonna kind of like do my job, I'm gonna complete my task, but kind of moonlight on getting this idea to bring it to life. And once it reaches a certain point of kind of stability, I'll,
go all in.
Yeah. Except that I want to say it was the first or second day back after break in January that there was a company all hands meeting, and they said, hey, as of yesterday, we signed an LOI deal to be acquired by Airbnb. And just sort of like silence in the room, total shock. I think we were all expecting kind of the announcement of the next round and like a sigh of relief. And it became clear that like the nature of the deal, it was really mostly like an acqui-hire to get engineers. And so everybody there would have to interview to have a role at Airbnb. And so, we all had, they did a good job of, doing the right thing by employees. And we had time to kind of like, maintain the product and sort of slowly start to wind it down. And so I was suddenly in this point of decision around like, okay, it's way, way, way too early for me to go full time on Good Cigar. And so I would have, but at the same time, if I were to go and like apply for a job at Airbnb and get a job at Airbnb, this idea of moonlighting on something kind of disappears, because in the first 6 months, a year of being somewhere, you want to make sure that you're working hard to prove that you are, one of the good ones. You can't, at year 4 on Tilt, I could kind of rest a little bit on my reputation if I wanted to stop work at 5 and switch gears into Good Cigar. But so that was the big like mic drop moment.
What was
after
it?
the success of the sale?
I would imagine like, so when that acquisition happens, like was everybody in the room feeling, and maybe yourself included, like, oh my God, this is a really bad thing. Things are going downhill? Because I would have thought, like, I guess this is because you were assuming that the news would be like, we just raised a huge round, things are going great. So that was like a sign that things weren't succeeding. But I just love to know, like, were you like, oh man, Tilt's going away, this isn't going to be great for anyone? Or
so, you know, in the immediate announcement of it, there's any number of different reactions, and some people were very excited, and some people, like, you know, over time when it became clear that like, hey, this is, Airbnb is buying Tilt's technology, but not everybody is guaranteed a spot. It was sort of this scramble to sort of say, like, you know, some people knew they didn't want that, left immediately, went and did other things, and some people were kind of like really fingers crossed, trying to get something there and trying to figure out where they would land. So it was, I mean, it was a wild chapter for sure.
what are like an emotional roller coaster from like the highs of thinking it'll be the next Facebook, on the private jets, on the rented party buses and stuff. Next thing you know, yeah. I mean, that's also that's an archetype of Silicon Valley as well, you know, a hard rise and fall. And I'm sure Tilt still like did well in the end, but that you had like a crash course on like a Silicon Valley archetype.
Yeah, very, very much so, which is great. I mean, I'm so glad in retrospect to have, it's really useful to have an experience at a time where you're at a company that isn't going well, or a company that fails, to sort of see that and learn those lessons was really fantastic. And I'm glad that it happened. And to your point, yeah, absolutely. It was like the classic Silicon Valley roller coaster of like, we're going to be huge. We're going to be huge. Okay. Maybe not, maybe not. Oh no. Oh no.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, I mean, at the time, very scary. It was convenient that, which was unique. I mean, the fact that I'm from the Southeast, I got married young. So everybody thought that I was like way older than I was, that I moved to San Francisco married. But I was married. And so my wife had a stable job. Airbnb was doing well enough to buy Tilt at the time, and continued to do better. So it was nice to know that like, I was not in any immediate, like, oh no, I'm going to like get kicked out of my apartment. We didn't have kids. So it was, all things considered, you know, not as scary as it otherwise would have been. And I think something about the suddenness of leaving Charlotte and coming and taking a job in San Francisco makes you realize like, hey, you know, things can change quickly. And so if this doesn't pan out, you know, you can bounce back.
And so how long did you have to make your decision then? You were like, you packed away, 250 cigars over the Christmas period. This came about, and then you're at the stage where, okay, do I stay? Do I go?
I decided to go ahead and go through with the interview process. I was like, let me, I'm just going to like bear down and try to get the job. And then if I have it, then I can make the decision as to whether I want the job at Airbnb or if I want to go full time. Otherwise, like, the decision will get made for me. And so I want to say I had like my interview took probably a week or two, and there was still day-to-day work that had to be done, which was really difficult, and be like, all right, well, let me respond to all that, because people were relying on our product, and we still had an obligation to users to keep the lights on and keep the trains running. So it's probably 2 weeks till I started interviewing, another 2 weeks of the interview process, and ended up getting an offer there, which, you know, that was the decision of like, okay, do I take a cool job at Airbnb, which a friend of mine at the time described very appropriately, I think, as kind of like being pursued or sort of falling into something with like a very attractive, after you break up, falling in with like a very attractive rebound girl, in that like, it doesn't matter how attractive this person is, it's Airbnb, but you're not in the right headspace to see them in that way, because you just got your heart broken. And I think that was true for a lot of people. Certainly there were people who were like, oh my gosh, Airbnb, stoked. It's a cool company. It's certainly not like a slouch, you know, compared to Tilt at all. But I ended up making the decision of being like, okay, as a family, my wife already works here. We already have some upside if Airbnb has some spectacular exit, which we'll see. They'll IPO pretty soon. And we don't have kids. We like have some savings. We are flexible. I've always wanted to start something, and I had this realization of kind of like, now is the perfect time to scratch this itch. I've already been working on the prototype of it. There's not that much work to be done. And maybe that's the best possible situation to be in, to just be thrust into this moment of like, okay, now this is your job. Go build the company, go make money. So that's what I decided to do. Rejected the Airbnb offer and got to work.
Love
Amazing.
it.
Amazing.
So with the rebrand of a cigar company, I'm so interested in like, how do you make something that feels that antiquated and like kind of old school and inaccessible feel like it's young and hip and ready for kind of young men and women to enjoy?
It's a good question. I think I had this idea that sitting around and enjoying a cigar with a group of friends feels very, very different than it looks in every time you are presented with any kind of like imagery about cigars. It is usually presented as like, you know, a group of old men standing around in a field wearing guayaberas, or it is a kind of smutty, like man in a suit with a kind of like woman on his arm, sort of in a red dress and heels, like seductively in the background while he smokes a cigar. And it just all felt very like campy and corny and bad.
Velvet, mahogany.
Yes. And you want to keep some of that. You want to keep like the vibes of that like are appealing. It's definitely like a old world masculine product. That's a lot of why people are drawn to it. But you also want to modernize it and say like, hey, this doesn't have to be exclusive to men. Like women don't have to be treated as objects in our marketing. There are women who like cigars, and that's great. So, I mean, a good answer is I didn't really know what it should look like, and I certainly didn't have any experience building a brand. And so I just started doing a lot of research. I was a big user. There's a platform. Have you guys heard of Skillshare?
Yeah.
So I started like just watching a bunch of Skillshare videos, and watched a video
About
on like
branding?
brand and brand identity and typography and packaging design and
And then a lot of anchorman to tell you what not to do.
yes. So that just little by little kind of brought it to life that way, and kind of sketched out. I really had a kind of list of brands to emulate. I'm like, here are the brands that are killing it right now in D2C, the brands that are killing it in like men's interest. If we could get picked up by a magazine, what kind of magazines will we want to be in, yada, yada. And so I had this kind of like master list and pulled a bunch of their creative, the way that they talked about themselves. And really, there's this great book called Steal Like an Artist, which just kind of encourages you to see creativity that way. That like, if you sit there and try to make something truly 100% totally original and never look at anything else, it's impossible. And if you copy one brand, that's plagiarism. But if you copy 20 different brands, that's originality, that's creativity, because you're identifying what it is that makes these things great. And for me, it was fun to do this thing that I have learned that I had a real knack for, and really enjoyed doing, but didn't have the resume experience up until that point. Nobody would have let me do it. And so that was one of the most fun and most terrifying things about starting your own company, is you get to wear every hat, but you also have to wear every hat. And you realize that maybe you're good at some things you thought you were good at, and maybe you are really bad at some things you thought you were good at. And so, it was about just kind of identifying the personality that we wanted to have, who was buying it, who the customers were. A big insight was that early on, most of our customers were actually women. It was women buying a gift for men. So it was like a $25, $30 price point. And it's cigars, which is a typically masculine gift. It's the perfect gift for like that $30 price point man in your family that's very difficult to buy for. It's like better than socks or a tie for your dad. And it was easy to kind of spin up those kind of, those things to tell people. And that was fun to play with. It's like making it approachable and educational, and making sure that people felt like, you know, we were an authority on this, and you can trust that your recipient is going to like this. Because if you just went into the cigar store, you have no idea what you're doing. You don't want to go there. And you want the person to open it up and be like, wow, I'm impressed. This is a really good cigar. Yeah. And then as a gifter, you're like, oh, thank you. I did great.
That kind of experience that you kind of talked about when you're kind of sharing cigars and you're sitting around, it's been a little bit different to kind of the optics of that exact same experience. Like, how did you communicate that experience, and how do you bring that to life?
So that's a good question. So the nature of the packaging, gosh, in the other room, I have a bag. I could go and grab it. So the way it was packaged, when you decide, hey, I would like to smoke a cigar, you need 4 things. You need a cigar, you need a way to cut it, you need a way to light it, and you need a way to store it at a precise temperature and humidity level. Cigars need to be kept between about 67, 72% humidity. Otherwise, they will dry out and taste like an ashtray, or they will get overly humidified and can grow mold. So the types of people who enjoy cigars tend to have to like have all the gear and know what they're doing. I guess the 5th thing would be you also have to kind of know what you're looking for. So one thing that we did specifically around trying to like encourage connection was that every one of our pouches included 2 of the same cigar. So it was meant to be enjoyed with somebody else. And so all of our branding and marketing was about like using that language of kind of like creating moments of connection and sitting down and enjoying a cigar with somebody else. One for you, one to share, kind of thing.
And so when I think about like a D2C cigar brand, I would imagine that this is something that at the very least challenges, if not threatens, like big cigar, you know, like traditional cigar brands and stuff. Like, was that a thing? Like, did you kind of position yourselves as like this underdog against traditional cigar companies? Was there an animosity there, or how did that industry work? Because I'm not really familiar with the cigar industry.
At the time, I was not either. I just knew that we were like, that having spent some time in tech, that there were just a million things that they could have been doing, should have been doing, and weren't. I would say the reaction initially was just like complete ignorance of I thought that initially they'd be like, oh my gosh, who are these young guns? Let's go try to buy their company ASAP. But really it was years before they ever noticed us. And you know, at the time there was so many things I was learning about being a founder. It didn't occur to me to try to build a lot of those relationships until later. So I think we were really trying to distance ourselves from that scene in a way that I think in retrospect was a big mistake. You can boil down the business plan of what I was trying to do at the time to let's try to sell cigars to people who don't smoke cigars very often, which when you phrase it that way, obviously isn't the most compelling pitch for a business.
You don't want to smoke cigars.
So, and I got advice from folks early on, like, oh, it should be like a subscription so you can get recurring revenue. And I just had this like fixed idea of what I thought the product needed to be. And really what was needed in the market was like an easy, approachable way to enjoy a cigar. Like smoking a cigar with a friend should be as easy as grabbing a 6-pack. That was what we wanted to do. And we did that. And then probably, you know, fast forward later into the business, we created a product that was aimed more at that traditional cigar smoker where you'd come in, you'd take a quiz about what you liked, whether or not you knew what you liked, what you prefer to drink with a cigar, your palate, your tastes a little bit. And then we would send you a collection of 3 or 4 or 5 different cigars suited for your tastes. And obviously the customer for that product was very different than the customer for our original product. And that's the moment where we've kind of started to build better relationships with the industry. So early on, we were buying such little amounts that you know, we were buying through a distributor. We had no the brands that we were selling weren't going to like give us any time of day because we're buying like a box or two at a time, whereas towards the end we were buying 30 boxes at a time. Somebody, and the sales rep for the territory knew us at the end. They didn't care who we were at the beginning. But generally, in the end, I would say overall good. I think overall the audience, the premium cigar market is growing slightly, but you could argue generally it's shrinking. It skews older and getting older. There's not a lot of new people coming in. And so by the end, I think there was a lot of curiosity and even appreciation from the industry to sort of like, it's good that there were some young guns trying to carry the torch forward.
It sounds like that probably is that brings you to the next transition point in your life, right? I imagine like what happened after you focus on the cigar company, like what happened next?
So let's see, I guess, zoom out 2 years, we had had like some success, but 2 years in, it definitely still felt like, day to day, you're pushing a boulder up a hill all of the time. I learned a lot about myself. One of the things is I learned that I prefer to work on a team. It was definitely like isolating and lonely to feel like, day in, day out, it's just me and my laptop. My partner was part-time. We did this intentionally in a bootstrapped way, raised a little bit of money later on, but we didn't think it was ever going to really offer venture scale returns, and also didn't think the industry was really attractive to people who were investing at all. So it was like, let's bootstrap, let's build this ourselves. And it just kind of reached a point.
That doesn't mean it can't be successful though.
Completely. And so there was a lot of optimism from us for sure. And so my partner, I was full-time on it, but my co-founder, just because we were so small, he was still working. So the whole time he kept his job. He worked as a legal counsel at Square. And it reached a point where something happened on his team. They shrunk a little bit. He was like, hey, I'm so slammed at work. I'm going to have less and less time to commit to this. And this came, on the heels of, we just launched our subscription product. It was sort of growing. It wasn't growing as fast as I thought it would grow. We were at a point where we probably needed to raise, but we didn't have a reliable customer acquisition method. Like the big hurdle with that business is you are not allowed to run ads on Instagram, on Facebook, on Pinterest. You can't, like when somebody searches cigar, you can't pay to be in the top spot on Google.
Really?
So yeah, for like I said earlier, it's all aimed at curbing cigarette smoking. Yeah. So, but programmatic ads through those channels are kind of like the lifeblood of D2C brands, and they shouldn't be. It's easy to get addicted to that kind of like easy way to get your face in front of folks, and so that was good, and that forced us to be skillful about other ways of growing. But without that core channel, it was really difficult to get repeatable, reliable growth. We didn't really know exactly even what our CAC was. And when you're in that position, the types of things that you do are more like media buying, like buying, podcast ads or coverage in Uncrate or partnership with a brand. And those, when you are testing something with Facebook ads, you can kind of iterate and test and spend very little to gain a decent amount of insight.
Yeah.
But without that, the cost of your swings are bigger. So like if we decided that we wanted to try, podcast ads across 8 different audiences, then, the minimum media buy is $2,000 each. Like that's a very expensive like test. And if it doesn't yield results, you better hope that the next one does, because you're bootstrapped. So we reached a point where I just wasn't really sure what the future would look like. We had gotten some interest a few different times from a larger competitor who was better funded than us and similar to us. And in a lot of ways, I felt like was kind of like emulating some of the things that we were doing, which was frustrating because they were a bit better resourced. Yeah. So was at a conference in Vegas, a tobacco conference, and then like out of nowhere just ran into the CEO of this rival company, who rival's the right word. I think at the time we were like, oh, those guys, but ended up meeting him, getting breakfast with him, it turned out he's a great guy. I really liked him. We had very similar stories. And at the time, my wife was 6 months pregnant. I was sort of like, kind of wondering where this would go, and kind of coming to terms with the fact that this wasn't going to be this like multi-million-dollar thing, that I wasn't going to get to retire on the Good Cigar Company yacht as I had imagined. And so it was definitely a low point for me, just as a founder, coming to grips with it not materializing the way that I wanted. But we also like had achieved a good amount of success. I just wasn't sure what it would look like, and it was kind of exploring an exit opportunity that looked different than I had always imagined. Yeah. But ended up chatting with him. There was a lot of interest on their side to try to either buy us or merge or create some sort of solution, just because we were so similar, both kind of like new players trying to get into personalized online D2C cigar subscription. I guess around that time and that moment of uncertainty, reached out to the CEO of Tilt, who had sold to Airbnb. I said, I'm exploring the idea of selling. Exactly. I'm exploring the idea of selling this company. I don't know anybody who's ever sold a company except for you. Can you hop on the phone with me for an hour and just like, let me explain what's going on? Help me think about price. Help me think about how to structure this. And so he was like, oh my gosh, yeah, sure. We hadn't kept in touch super well. And the timing was like really lucky and incredible that he had got an Airbnb for 2 years, building out their like concerts plan, and then had left Airbnb to get into angel investing. And so he had built a lot of great relationships and was doing a lot of like seed stage investing in a lot of D2C brands, and had been himself moonlighting on an idea for like a mass market nootropics energy drink, which at the time was called Groove Mind, was the idea. And he was like, hey, what about if like this whole thing, this sale process could drag on for 6 months, a year? I need help now. What if you just came on to work with me for 3 months? We'll just see where it goes, and I'll pay you while we figure this out. So that's what I decided to do. That was by May. We signed a deal to get acquired on June 9th, 2019. On June 20th, my daughter was born. And then July 4th or 5th, I started at Magic Mind, or what is now Magic Mind full time. So, the initial.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Sounds like a blur.
That was yeah. If we're talking about transitions, that was a lot of transitions all at once.
What were some of the pieces of advice that he gave you when you're thinking about selling your company?
The one that stands out was, he was like, I'm forgetting the phrasing, it was something about, he was like, you need to create, I think he said a white rabbit. You need to create like something that people are chasing. So if you're talking to one company about potentially doing this, you need to create a sense of like urgency. You need to generate other conversations and say like, hey, this one's moving forward, to kind of force a decision. So we were talking to them. We were talking to one of our largest retail partners who sold cigars. The thinking was, hey, like this is a huge project for you guys, and like kind of general men's merchandise, a huge project for you guys during holidays. And you, as someone who's not a core tobacco retailer, have a unique opportunity to grow, because you can advertise for like, throwing knives or for whatever stuff men are looking at. And then as you build an audience, you can cross market. Once you already have the customer, you can show them tobacco products and do all of the like legal stuff that you need to do and verify age or whatever. But like you guys could very quickly, by buying us, grow and sort of like be a major player in this space. And so that was a really, really great advice. And just advice around how to structure some of the like minutia around, like earnouts and some of these things, and like how much you want in cash versus equity, and how to think about treating everybody who already had ownership in what we were doing. All things that like, when you are a big company, you have a bunch of people around the table who have done it before, or finance people or lawyers sort of saying this is how it's done, but we didn't really have much of that. So it was really great to have his advice to say like, well, these were big deals when we went through it. because our deal was smaller, I wasn't selling like a team per se, where most everybody who was working with us was on a contractor basis. So it was fairly simple. But the biggest one was just sort of, making sure that you created as much competition as you could among the potential buyers.
Love it. So you took that top hat off, pulled out that white rabbit.
Exactly.
Put a cigar in your mouth.
Yeah, it's a great image.
Yeah, there was definitely a celebratory cigar lit in the aftermath of, the sale of the company and the birth of my first child. So
a lot of things.
A fitting way to cap it off.
That's amazing. So then, probably the final piece then of your story, your latest piece rather, not the final piece. I mean, you're a healthy man. The cigars got you. Co-creator of Magic Mind. Tell us a little bit about the Nootropics company that you went and created.
Sure. So that was honestly just very fun to come into something that was. So similar in a lot of ways, but I had done it once before. So I was coming in with a lot more confidence in myself and what I was good at. And James had raised some money. So coming in, I had put, I think 25K of my own money into Good Cigar. So to come in with, significant resources to really try to do all these things correctly was so fun. And I had built all these muscles about like, hey, here's how you can do this on a shoestring budget and be as lean as possible. So it's fun to collaborate with him and learn from his experience, which was, on a massive scale. Tilt had raised something like $70 million over the course of its time. And so it continues to be very fun working with him and just iterating on trying to tease out his idea about what it was and what he wanted to call it. And then sort of, trying to get trademarks and changing the name and working with an agency to work on the brand and packaging and product. And it's been a blast. So we started talking in May, June, and we launched the following February. So it's about, we started, by selling this is the bottle, like a bottle filled with, wow. There we go.
There it is.
Little bottle filled with dry powder was how we would first send it out to friends and family, and then found food consultancies to help us kind of connect with somebody who could help us manufacture this and do the right testing and source ingredients from, Japan, the matcha, and, things in India. So definitely a lot of new skill sets. Some things I was able to build on from my time beforehand. Some things were totally new, but it was fun to offer some value to him. This is somebody who I obviously had a tremendous amount of admiration for, to feel like I could come in and add value and to do something that he hadn't had any direct experience running e-commerce before or shipping a physical product, just because Tilt was a digital service. And so that was fun to come in with some expertise, to feel like I had really gained something in the aftermath of, or just along the journey of starting Good Cigar.
That's awesome. And I think nootropics are kind of coming into the mainstream now more and more. But for those that don't know, what are nootropics, and what's the kind of audience that would be attracted to them?
Sure. So I like to say that the current, this is changing now, and we're trying to be a big part of the change of it. But nootropics have been around and have gained attention for a little while among a pretty finite group that I like to call the biohacking bros. These are people who listen to Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, and a San Francisco developer. These guys know about nootropics and are experimenting with various supplements to build their stack. And so James's vision that he came to me with was let's build a mass market nootropics brand that sort of fits into all of these kind of overlapping movements around natural food, even oh gosh, I'm blanking on the term, but nutraceuticals, right? People who are starting to, their food habits have been changing so much over the last 5 years. What consumers expect from their food has changed a lot. And there's just the attention around mental health and burnout culture, and even realizing that like the existing energy drinks, a lot of them are like, we all know are pretty bad for you. Like we all know that Red Bull or Monster, like deep down having that much caffeine, let alone all of the other ingredients in it that you can't pronounce. Like we know on some level that that's really not good for us. And so
if the word takes up 3 lines, probably don't consume it.
Yeah, exactly. And so nootropics is sort of like a general category for things that increase cognition and increase blood flow to the brain. So we're calling Magic Mind a productivity drink to differentiate it from an energy drink, because an energy drink is something that you need to like stay awake on a long road trip, right? That is a very different feeling than what you need when you have 50 emails that you need to go through. And so the drink itself isn't offering, 300 milligrams of caffeine. It's only about 40 milligrams of caffeine from the matcha. And matcha is the core of the drink. And then we add in a handful of nootropics, which help increase blood flow to the brain, but also adaptogens. So adaptogens are anything that reduces stress, reduces cortisol levels in the body. So you're sort of getting this like energy to do the work that you need, and focus on the task at hand, and also just a calmness. So you're not jittery and stressed, because that's not going to yield good results and just helping you get into flow state. So that was the vision, continues to be the vision, and so far it's going exceedingly well, much better than either of us expected at this point in the journey. It's resonating a lot with I think honestly, the whole category of like knowledge workers. I think that COVID obviously threw a wrench into everybody's playbook for 2020, and there were things we wanted to do that we can't really do. And, we wanted to partner with tech companies and sort of get Magic Mind into tech fridges everywhere. But obviously the tech fridges are sitting empty right now. But on the flip side, there were a lot of things that happened during COVID that were great for D2C brands. A lot of companies weren't spending the marketing dollars in the same way. So clicks were a lot cheaper for companies like us. And then you've got a workforce, a national workforce, who's suddenly thrust into a totally different environment where they're forced to do their job from home, 90% of whom didn't do that before, and probably struggling with productivity. Like, how do I continue to get things done? And so the fact that we introduced this productivity drink that's direct to consumer, that you can have shipped to your house without going anywhere, was a kind of perfect product for this season. So it was really, obviously, I don't want to say lucky, because COVID has been so awful in so many ways, for us included on a personal level, but at least, there are certainly winners and losers in the COVID world. I'm, crying big tears about what it's doing to movie theaters. But for us, a D2C productivity drink, it was, it was helpful to the brand for sure.
I'd love to try it out.
Hey, I'll send you guys. I'll
thank
send
you.
Both.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it sounds like the exact kind of drink I need. Like the way you described it, I feel like there is this sort of a gap in the market. I guess it's probably what you guys identified, because when I think about if I want to get through 50 emails, my first thought is to drink Red Bull or coffee. But it sounds like Magic Mind's probably better for that purpose, and also just for health. Because like you were saying, I drink Red Bull. I'm not proud of it, but I do, right?
Yeah, but it works. Well, another way so many different ways to kind of pitch the concept, because it's, and it's the 100-year vision of it is to replace coffee, right?
Yeah.
And
I love that.
There are a number of people who love the ritual of coffee, and for those people, we're not trying to like pass any judgment on what they're doing or say that coffee's not great. It's great.
Don't judge me.
My coffee right here.
But if you are the type of person who is going to coffee not necessarily because you love the ritual or love the taste, if you're going to coffee for the effect because it gets you from groggy, sleepy mode into work mode, we're coming out and saying, hey, there are a lot of other things that we've discovered in the last 200 years that will get you into a better headspace that's suitable for work and the kind of work that a lot of us do these days better than coffee. And there's a tremendous amount of research on a lot of those things, like, lion's mane mushrooms and cordyceps and turmeric and, matcha, L-theanine. And so this is the narrative around the idea is like coffee is an imperfect productivity drink, even if it's a lovely ritual.
Do you think it's mostly an educational challenge?
I think it's an educational challenge for sure. But I think the bigger one, and I think that we've done a great job at this so far, is that it was a brand problem, because nootropics have existed for a while and just failed to emerge into the whole, just the aisles of the grocery store or gas station or whatever. So you've got people who are taking pills of things. I've got, things on my desk that are kind of the pill powder version of the early forms of what Magic Mind became. And so I think that the challenge initially was like, let's take this thing, which has gotten some traction among a small community, and just, kind of similar to the Good Cigar problem, is like, let's put a different face on this and sell its benefits in a different and stronger way. But then beyond that, absolutely, it's still a game of education. We're not pitching it to the mass market as like a nootropic energy drink, because we know they don't know what nootropics are. We're saying, hey, this is a productivity drink and it's powered by nootropics. Here's what those are. Here's what these ingredients do.
Love it.
I love that. That's awesome. Hey, Will, thanks so much. We've got 30 seconds. You can pitch and ask for whatever you want from audience.
Oh my gosh. To the audience, I'll say, check out Magic Mind. Website is magicmind.co. Buy some, and I can work with these guys. And if you guys would like a promo code, happy to share that with the audience. We can figure that out later. And
Woo, for sure.
Follow me on Twitter. I don't have a lot of Twitter followers. I'm trying to make it on Twitter. My username is McQuain Will.
McQuain Will. Okay.
At
Right.
McQuain Will. How do we spell McQuain?
McQuain is McQuain. I'll probably come up for Will McQuain. You can search it either way. I think you'll find me.
I think maybe you just got a million new followers right now, just from the announcement on this podcast. So very
100 million?
excited. 100 million? 200 million?
My
Whatever.
phone is lighting up in my pocket.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, it's been awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Anthony.